Hello, team. Just give me a couple minutes and I'll be getting started for you, okay? Just gotta make sure everyone's got a proper recording. And this thing's updating. That's fun. Turns out I needed to do that anyway. Perfect. Nobody, nobody, nobody. Wrong one, but I'll take it. Yeah, it's tough to balance all three of these. So if I don't see your notification, just assume that's on me, okay? I guess that'll work. Okay. When the alert arrived in New Fisher, no one noticed the ship's arrival. What is known is that nobody unloaded the fish and that the fish were mixed into the rest of the supply. And even though there was a bit of a stir with the alert's arrival with no crew, for whatever reason, the town of New Fisher didn't care about the lost captain nor crew. Normally, a ghost ship arriving at the docks would be the talk of the town for months and a legend that is shared for generations. Stories of the first white men meeting the Inuk were so frightening that they are stories that are still shared among many of the tribes of the northern forest. So, a ghost ship with no crew but full of fish should have been something worth talking about. And yet, it was barely marked in the ledgers of NF Lumber Company as a returned ship. A check was cut for Jimmy Trout for the fish, and also for the portion of the alert that Jimmy's father once owned. While everyone else prepared for the spring festival, Jimmy was left alone to try and investigate what happened to his father. No one else had enough of a connection to the alert to notice how odd it was to have an entire crew disappear, nor could anyone else notice the fact that the ship was being forgotten, that some force was causing everyone to just forget everyone on the alert. January 31st, 2740. I learned of my father's death after a knock on the door. When I went to the door, the representatives from the company didn't even wait long enough to explain what happened. They just tucked the envelope with three checks. First one is for the fish, the second one is for his portion of the ship, and the final check is for his life insurance. I felt my heart break when I saw it was for life insurance. I collapsed on the front door, and tears burned while falling from my eyes while no one cared. People walked by on the street, sometimes glancing my way, but no one cared enough to try and talk to me. Instead, my golden retriever, Mercury, walked up to me and started licking my face while I cried. All I had was Mercury. My father, who I inherited my name from, is gone. My mother has been gone for years, and now I have Mercury. Still, though, as my tears started drying, I began to wonder. Still, though, as my tears started drying, I began to wonder, how did my dad die? If the ship came in, then he wasn't lost at sea. The check didn't explain how he died, and the company didn't even bother to explain what happened. So I decided I would have to figure out what happened. After I dropped my checks off, I had lots of experience in managing the house while dad was at sea for weeks or even months at a time. The house we lived in was a one-bedroom apartment. My dad would sleep on the couch when he was home, but I had a lot of experience in paying bills, dealing with bureaucrats, and educating myself. So I had a lot of practice, but still, I always had dad out there. He was bringing in money and he was someone out there. And now my house felt emptier, even if it was exactly as empty as it was yesterday. It felt lonelier knowing that he is never going to come back. I decided to go to the company office to find out what they knew. There has to be a reason why he died. Death always has a reason. January 31st, 2740. Later. I went to the company office in Old Town, the buildings that were first built in New Fisher before being converted into new purposes. The old two-story administration building was now the town hall, and then there was the old lumber mill that was converted into a library that, even decades after it closed, still smelled like sawdust. And then there was the old train station, a station that once ran trains in and out of town twice an hour, even at night, back when New Fisher was the hub of the NF Lumber Company. And now the station was lucky to get a train twice a week. Attached to the train station was the company administrative building. I think they remained attached to the train station building so they could easily access the only consistent power source and a working phone line in town to do their business with the cities further down south. If you wanted to dial outside of the town, you would have to call the company building and request a call be transferred out. The only other way to contact the outside world was the forest ranger station that has a long range radio transmitter to connect to other ranger stations. The closest station was in Mermaid Bay, and rumor was that they always had their hands full in Mermaid Bay. But thankfully, New Fisher never really had a need for the outside world, and when you needed something from the outside world, you went to the company building. I entered through the company store. And like the general store, the company store prides itself on neatness. Every shelf is straight and organized, and the prices are printed on plastic rather than handwritten on a scrap of paper. And most of the goods here were coated with a thin layer of dust because they were so rarely bought. Seeing the prices on them, I could see why they were so rarely bought. There were VHS tapes from Nippon, translated into common Creole, tapes that weren't even a year old yet, boom boxes that could play without static and could be heard three doors down, and they even had the rarest of all items in New Fisher: Polaroid cameras and film. Cameras that could take pictures of what was going on without having to send the film outside of town and wait weeks or even months for the pictures to be returned, if they ever returned at all. My dad had an old Polaroid at home, and there was still some film on it. Checking these prices in town, I can see why he only broke the camera out for my birthday. Just past the store, there was the much less busy post office. A bored clerk at the desk sold stamps, envelopes, and would collect the rare letter from outside of town. But Sandra Sweet, named Sandy, had another role as the postmaster of town. She was also the town banker, company accountant, and town barista, as she had the only working coffee pot in all of town. Sorry, just stretching my back. Ow, wow. What's everyone doing? Yeah, seems like they're busy. Even though she was collecting four different paychecks from four different jobs, she was perpetually bored. Even as I deposited my checks into the family account, Sandy's eyes glazed over as she updated her ledger in a big old book that seemed to be 1,000 years old. As she updated it, and she gave me a new form to sign. This confirms that you are the sole existing heir to your father, James Trout Sr., named Jimmy. This confirms that you are Jimmy Trout Jr., too young for a cognomen. She told me as I looked over the paperwork and I signed it. As I signed it, I asked Sandy, who I spoke to, about my father's death. She yawned as she pointed at the administrator's office and she said in a very bored voice, "Speak to the chief admin and ask him. Honestly, it doesn't matter," she said in her bored tone as I asked her what she meant by that, before her eyes turned glassy and she answered cryptically, "Nobody escapes death, and when you're dead, it doesn't matter anymore," she said in a tone that sounded both callous and also like she was sleepwalking. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged and went back to reading her coffee-stained pulp romance. Realizing I would get no further answers from her, I went over to the chief admin's office. If he has a name, I don't see it anywhere, and he never introduced himself as anything else. The door only said chief administrator, so I knocked on the door and I was called in, and I saw the office of the most powerful man in all of New Fisher. The chief administrator was a white man with more frown lines on his face than hairs on his head. He wore a navy blue suit with a red tie. He would wear the same clothes each day, and in addition to being the chief administrator of the company in town, he was also the elected mayor of New Fisher. Still, he spent a lot more time in this office than he did in town hall. Even when he called me inside his office, he was busy signing numerous documents, and he barely glanced up at me over his spectacles. He grunted towards me, not even welcoming me, as he continued to sign his paperwork, not caring at all that I just lost my father. He didn't even consider me enough to speak first, so I had to ask him. I wanted to know how my father died. I asked him as he glanced up and he went over his ledger. his finger going down the entire list before he finally answered. He was presumed lost at sea. His ship returned without him on board. Per Regulation 17, any ship that returns without its crew is presumed dead at sea. If he returns within 3 years, his death will be retracted, and any lost property because of his legal death will be compensated, minus the life insurance payments, the chief admin said before he went back to his paperwork. So you have no proof that he is actually dead? I asked him, and he shook his head before his eyes also turned glassy, and he explained, "We don't have proof he is dead. However, we also don't have proof that he is alive. Nobody was on the ship, and with no proof of life, he is for all intents and purposes dead. If he is recovered, we can change the paperwork. But for now, he is dead, and that is important because rent is still due." His eyes cleared as he explained. "The rent contract is still in effect for the rest of the year. If you move out early, then you will owe us the missed rent. So if I was you, I would get a paying job sooner rather than later," he said as I gritted my teeth and I wanted to yell at him. "I came here because of my dead father, and here I was getting reminded that I owe money to the company. I already owe more money to the company this year than I possess because of my father's death. So I would have to get a job, and there isn't a lot of jobs in town that haven't been claimed yet." Can everyone hear me okay? Mhm. I got some room temperature chocolate milk. How's everyone doing? Okay, that's fine. Oh, and don't forget, we have Fisher Feast for the Spring Festival at the end of the month. We still need your family's contribution to the potluck, he said as he went back to his work, and I left the office, my fists clenched and my head pounding. I would have to pay rent, find a job, and get food for the potluck. And with my dad dead, I would have to completely give up on schooling. I've only known about my dad's death for a few hours, and I already feel like I've aged so many years. I am so tired, and I'm already tired of being tired. I don't have any control. Things are just happening to me, and everyone is expecting me to be ready and to be able to handle it all immediately. I was starting off with debt. The only prospects I could think of in town were the docks as a fisherman, which I really don't want to do, or I could join the forest rangers. I made my way home, where I oiled and checked my rifle, an old standard infantry rifle from my mother before she died. February 1st, 2740. I dreamt of my mother last night, but she wasn't the woman I remembered from the pictures on the mantle. She had long dark hair, skin that was more blue like the sky, with diamond-like stars on her bare skin, and she was crying alone in the forest. so far away from everyone else that she would be vulnerable to the fiends. Except in the dream, I wasn't afraid of the fiends. I was scared of her being alone. So I approached her and she looked up at me and she didn't recognize me as her child. Have you seen my husband? Have you seen my children? She asked me. I opened my mouth to tell her that I was her son, except when I opened my mouth to speak, no voice came out. All I could do was let out a raspy breath. Even with my best effort, I could not make any noise. But the blue woman reached out for my face as she gripped my face in her hand as she examined me closely. She spent a lot of time on my eyes. One of your eyes is golden, just like my son's, but his other eye was silver. Yours is blue, like my own. You aren't him. You aren't my son. You aren't my husband, but you are someone. A someone who isn't nobody. I can give you a gift, my bloodless child. But know this, child. I can only give you a gift if you do not know what it is first, and I will need to take a price as well. Do you accept it? She asked me, and I nodded, only wanting her to spend a little more time with me. But after I nodded, her grip tightened on my head as her other hand reached out for my right eye. I screamed as her sharp nails dug into my blue eye, and she popped it out of my skull. For a brief moment, I could see through both eyes as she opened her mouth wide to pop my eye on her long silver tongue. My eye, still connected to the optic nerve, saw my own terrified face from inside of her mouth as she snapped her jaws shut, severing the view and leaving me in greater pain as she held me still with one hand. Even when I tried hitting her or tried fighting, she only held me still as she quietly hummed to herself, and her bloody hand reached above to where the moon was in the night sky. I once had one son who cut out the eye of his brother. I had to have a new eye made out of moonlight, she said as she removed the silver moon out of the sky. She crushed it in her hand, shaping it in with her palm and fingers, like the moon was made out of clay, and she continued with her story. And even when he lost his eye, he traded his brand new eye of moonlight to keep his other brother alive, even in death. I wonder if that is something you would ever decide to do, my child, or if true sight is something that is worth more to you than the life of another. But then again, your own sight was delicious. So maybe I will keep you around a while longer, just in case I need another eye to snack on, she said as she opened her hand to reveal the clay was shaped into another eye, this one out of silver clay, as she shoved her hand into my skull, forcing the silver eye into my socket, scraping, burning, and squelching into my skull, almost as painful as pulling my original eye out, as she shoved the silvery eye into my skull, and then I could see again. In a way, I could see two different scenes overlaid with each other. In one vision, I could see that she was still a woman I thought of as my mother, and in the other vision, I saw her as something else. something that consumed and covered the entire night sky, something that had every other star above dancing across her flesh, and she didn't notice. But I could see her smiling, a horrible smile that filled me with dread, because this impossibly powerful being saw me and was fascinated by me. And she was definitely not my mother. My mother didn't make me afraid of falling into her. My mother didn't make me fear life. My mother didn't consume my eye only to use it to watch the world below. And as the woman spoke, I could see her speak as a person, and I could see her speak as the sky as well. Now you see truth. A useful tool, but be warned, seeing too much can be painful, but there is only ever one way to stop seeing truth, she said as she opened her mouth to reveal the bloody, mashed up mess of my eye, the eye that I could still see my own face through. When I woke up, I wrote about the dream, and I think I might be struggling to process my dad's death. In the mirror today, I thought I had a silver eye, but it was just a dream. It had to be. Today, I am going to submit a job application at the ranger station. My mother was a forest ranger back when she was alive. There's a few different jobs I can do. Scout, guide, and trailblazer all sound good, especially trailblazer, because then I can help shape the trails, paths, and roads throughout the forest. That would mean months out on the trail, which would get me away from the town and an opportunity to save up to head into one of the cities. The ranger station is a large log house, at least 50 meters on each side, with a combination radio tower and fire watch tower at the back of the building. Don't know if anyone can hear that, but they're being loud outside, so I'm going to take this moment to stretch. Yes, my child. Anyone seen that movie? Fun movie. Oh, they're done. It's even built next to the gates leading out of town. The top of the building is adorned with solar panels to provide power even when the generators fail. The garage is a separate building that opens both inside and outside of the town, also covered in solar panels whose sole job is to charge the four trucks inside of the garage. The ranger I submitted my application with greets me warmly. Her placard tells me her name is Ranger Jane Kelly. If she has a chosen name, it isn't said on the placard. When I hand in my application, she skims it over before she calls me back into the break room for an interview. Then she begins the interview by asking a few basic questions. Do you know how to drive? I've never had a chance to actually drive a car. Do you know how to maintain a gun? If so, what guns are you familiar with? I do know how to maintain a SIR and an 8-shot revolver. I've been doing that for a few years. Do you know how to read and write? I do. I maintain a journal daily. What are some of your favorite books? Marine biology and mythology. This piqued her interest as she wrote something down on her clipboard, and she pulled something off her clipboard and she showed me a printed article. I want you to read this article silently for 2 minutes, and then in less than 1 minute, summarize the article, she said as I read over the article. It was an old news article about a hunting treaty between Winterfell and Toronto. Essentially, with the explosion of deer population, hunting season was being extended an extra month, and the amount of deer that could be hunted was increased by two as well. With my 2 minutes over, I explained that to her, and she smiled as she signed that off, and she told me I got the job. I wasn't going to be a trailblazer, scout, nor a guide, but I had the makings of a decent administrative assistant. Apparently, the literacy rates in New Fisher weren't very good. Most people could read some, but reading comprehension was very low with most people, not being able to summarize what they read, let alone read it quickly before summarizing. So I was already starting today. My pay rate wasn't quite as good as it was in the docks, but it would be steady. So I started my shift by organizing the backlog of case files alphabetically. February 1st, 2740, lunchtime. I've been onboarded and I've met the other rangers. Ranger Larry works on the radio. Apparently, he sleeps during the day and works mostly at night. And Ranger Kelly listens to the radio during the day. And then there's officers Jade and Carlin, who drive the vehicles at night and who act as law enforcement when it's needed. And then, other than Larry, Kelly, Jade, and Carlin, there is just me. Apparently, they've been short staffed, and meeting them in person, it has been disappointing. Growing up, you hear stories about the amazing things the forest rangers do. You hear things like how they take out a forest fiend from 50 meters away. You hear that one's gonna be painful to remove. You hear things like how they take out a forest fiend from over 50 meters away with a hatchet, or you hear about them out fighting bears or outrunning speeding cars. Meeting them in person, and the first thing I notice about them is they are all just so tired. Their clothes are rumpled, their hair uncombed, and still there is a determination behind their eyes. I was told that I'm making a big difference, but I have a hard time seeing how an admin assistant can help rangers. February 2nd, 2740. I dreamt I saw my father out in the surf, so I ran after him. He looked away from me as he wandered deeper and deeper into the ocean, getting further and further from me. As I waded through the water, my father got further and further from me. Soon I was swimming in the ocean, and still he got further and further from me. The waves pushed against me, trying to push me back to shore, and I could feel fingers caressing my legs as I swam. Still, I swam after my father, who was now barely a gray dot on the horizon, until even that vanished, and I looked all around me, but I could no longer see the shore. The sky above was as gray as the sea below. The fingers went from brushing my legs to grabbing, and even when I tried to stay afloat, something kept pulling me below the waves. As I struggled to breathe, I took one last desperate gasp before I finally was pulled below. When I felt the fingers, I expected a mermaid or maybe a man pulling me down. What I saw instead was something else entirely. It was made entirely of fingers. It was like bone white coral, but made entirely out of fingers that looked all too human. It reached up to grab me in a long arm made of endless fingers as the abomination pulled me down further and deeper into the water. The abomination of fingers stretched for endless lengths. Everywhere I looked beneath me in the ocean, it was more and more fingers that pulled me further down as I struggled to reach my hands to the fading light above when something unexpected happened. A massive golden trident, larger than a tree, flew through the water, plunging into the center mass of the many-fingered horror. As its purple blood flooded through the water, and I was let go, it floated towards the surface, and when I broke through, I woke up. My dreams have never been this intense before. February 2nd, later. Something is happening in town. When I went to the ranger station, it was quiet in town. Normally, you'd hear people at the docks at this time, or you'd see the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker hard at work. But I walked to the ranger station alone, and it was 8 a.m., so a lot more people should have been awake. When I arrived, Ranger Kelly told me that the officers were dealing with an altercation down by the docks, and they haven't returned yet, and she needed me to keep the station locked while she went to go check on them. Other than her and I, there is only Ranger Larry, and he is both ill with blood eye shots and he's trying to sleep. So I will hold down the fort at the ranger station while Kelly checks on the officers. It's been quiet in the station and it is noon now. Ranger Jane Kelly hasn't responded to any attempts to reach her on the radio. So I've checked the frequencies for those in town, thankfully all written down on a handy piece of paper next to the radio. But no one is responding. The ships aren't responding, the mayor's office is silent, and even the company office is not picking up. And I know it isn't the radio because I can pick up signals from Winterfall, and I can pick up a signal from a station that calls itself Diamond Heart Radio. And from there, I heard a few different songs. New songs I haven't heard before. And after the songs were done, though, something strange happened. A familiar voice spoke on the radio, my voice, and I knew it couldn't have been a recording because the voice didn't sound like a recording. It's hard to describe, but you know how your voice sounds different when played back to you versus how it sounds when you speak out loud. The voice sounded like how my voice sounds to me when I speak out loud. I heard my voice read a news message I hoped was a joke. Instead, it sounded like something else entirely. Quick drink break. I'm feeling that in my throat. Yeah, this next section took me 2 days to write, so I put a lot of thought into these little details. How's everyone doing? Hey, Kingan, good to see you. Just feel free to listen. So, don't know your time zone there, but don't know the time zone I'm in either, so I'm just gonna record it. Hope this helps. So I'm going to record for a couple more minutes, then I'm going to actually go on a quick walk around break. I hope that's okay with everyone. Awesome. So I guess if you got questions for me, Kingan, you can put them down and I'll see if I can answer them after the break. Okay? Cool. With the recent addition of Newt into New Fisher, that brings the amount of Olympia class entities to 4. I clarify, we now have confirmed reports of Adam's Wrath, Newt Voidburn, None of the Abyss, and Nobody Special, all within New Fisher. So any interference from any other Olympias is not possible without triggering a Megiddo level crisis. So, to any survivors left in New Fisher, I recommend heading to the church. Right now, there is only one listener in New Fisher right now. I felt ice crawl up my spine when I heard that. There was no way the speaker could know it was me. Could they? I say again, I know you don't believe me, but right now you are the last standing forest ranger. You need to warn your town before it's too late. The voice said before the station became static, and nothing I could do would bring it back to life. Okay, everybody, I'm about to go take a quick walk around break. I should be back in about 2, 3 minutes. But yeah, any questions? Feel free to bring them up, okay? I'll try to answer them when I can. But just to make sure everyone's got something to listen to. Anyone got a song preference? Probably not. So here, I've been fixating. Hello, chat. I'm back. Did I miss anything? Did I miss anything? Hmm. I don't know if I'll have a live every week, but possibly. Just kind of whenever it hits my fancy at this point. My schedule's not stable enough to do this at a regular basis, so hope that helps. But yeah, congratulations on finding out you're transgender. That's really good news. I have to get you a flag one of these days. Bring you back to life. Do you have any other questions for me, Kingen? Okay. Do you have any other questions for me? I'll type in my response. Again, I'm not in your time zone, so there's no way for me to know what is or isn't a good time. So it's 6 a.m. where you're at, it's 10 p.m. where I'm at. So for me to do something like 8 a.m., I'd have to be up at midnight, or if I'm gonna even do something at 10, I'm gonna have to be up at 2 a.m. But these are recorded, so you can watch them at a later time if you prefer. But do you have any other questions for me? Okay, just so that way we have a little written record. And yeah, anyone remember where we were at? Bring it back to life. Bring it back to life right here. I wanted to believe it was fake, but I knew deep in my heart that it wasn't fake. But I couldn't be the last forest ranger. Larry was still here. I heard a thump from the bunks as the door opened just after the thump, and I could see what was left of Ranger Larry. I could see that Larry tore at his face and his fingertips. His lower jaw was exposed with bare bone visible, bone that was still attached to the upper jaw by long, thin fibers that tunneled through the flesh. The fibers were connected to the bone by barnacles that licked the air, and I could see they weren't the only barnacles on his body. Across his body, I could see it was honeycombed through with barnacles that burrowed through his flesh and were embedded in the bone, leaving his chest to resemble a honeycomb as he lurched forward, leaking pus, blood, and stomach acid through the holes. Fluids that smoked, and when it fell, it evaporated like water droplets on an iron skillet. As he stepped towards me, I could see his eyes. They were bloodshot with tiny hair-like tentacles that waved just behind his cornea. Every single hole in his body produced these hair-like tentacles as he stepped closer to me, and in desperation, but not before, throwing the first thing my hand could grab, a coffee pot. The steaming liquid splashed across his body, and even when the glass cut the flesh, he did not slow as he stepped closer. Thankfully, he wasn't quick, but I now had a moment to think. I went to the gun cabinet where I entered the passcode I learned just yesterday. Removing the rifle from inside, I chambered around and I aimed it carefully at Larry's head before pulling the trigger. His cranium above his eyes fragmented, leaving him only his nose and his upper jaw behind, since his lower jaw also fell from the force as he fell to his knees. And despite having no mouth, there was a long rasp from his throat as he fell forward, leaving behind bile and blood on the carpet that quickly evaporated along with his fallen flesh. Yeah, that's important to the plot. It's a Lovecraftian thing. As I stepped over his corpse to make my way to the radio. Larry must have died recently, and his body returned as a forest fiend. Although, with what was said on the radio, I would feel more comfortable if I got more help from outside the town. So I called out to Mermaid Bay and told them that there were no more rangers and that the forest fiends got into the town somehow. They advised me to try and stay put, that help would be that help would be sent as soon as they could. But it would take time, and they also advised the fact that the church was where people were supposed to go, so I would have to let them know over the radio. So I tuned to the emergency broadcast and I warned everyone in the town to make their way to the church. And when I tuned back to the forest rangers, I felt something grab me. With the radio still on, I turned to see that Larry was grabbing me with one hand, and with the other, he smushed the radio. His head was still almost completely gone, but those disgusting cilia had grown even longer after the loss of his head. Nearly a meter long, those abominable tongue fingers licked the air and wrapped around my arms as they dug into my flesh, and I tore away from the abomination. The cilia squirmed across my skin like worms as I tore away from Larry, and he turned what was left of his head towards me as another raspy moan escaped the throat. I quickly grabbed a bag and all the ammunition I could carry as I made my way outside of the station. I have one stop to make. February 2nd, 2740, night. I made my way home. On the way, I could see strange hieroglyphic writings on the roads and houses. Hieroglyphics that I could only see with one eye, but not the other. I don't know what they can mean, but it hurts my eyes to try and read them. Like it's something made for burning my eyes. And then there's something else that doesn't make sense. All of the doors are open. Every house is broken open, and I don't see any bodies. The only blood is used to make the marks that I can only see with one eye, marks that smoked and slowly evaporated. When I make it home, the door is busted open and I can hear Mercury's quiet yips inside. He would only yip like that when Dad made it home. I quickly enter the house and I point the gun inside, not sure what I would see. What I did see was not something I expected. On the couch was a skeleton covered in those gray barnacles, with the cilia acting as tendons and muscles, moving the bones of the body as the skeleton pet the head of the dog. Even with all of his skin missing, I recognized the way he pet the dog. with 3 fingers carefully combing through Mercury's hair as the skeleton turned its empty sockets to me. You made it home, I told what was left of my father, as the monster shoved Mercury off his lap and he stood to make his way towards me, his body covered in far more cilia than Larry. As the cilia reached out for me, and I aimed the gun at his chest, pulling the trigger. I didn't kill him, but I knocked him down as I grabbed Mercury's leash, and he excitedly followed me as we made our way to the church. On the front doors of the church, the only doors that were untouched in the entire town, was another odd hieroglyphic. Made out of black ink instead of red blood was an eye. An eye I could only see through one eye. I knocked on the church doors and I was let in. There are dozens of others here. I hope we make it until the forest rangers come to town. But everyone keeps staring at me like there is something wrong with me. But I can see that they all have bloodshot eyes. Final stretch, everyone. How is everyone feeling? Good work, Kingdon. We couldn't do it without people like you. Sorry if that sounded sarcastic. I meant that genuinely. And the hardest part for writing stories like this is keeping the timeline straight. So hopefully this will be worth it. February 7th, 2740. I've not eaten in 5 days. All of the food that they have looks rotten and is dirty to me. Even when I broke open a can of beans I found in the back cupboard, it was rotten and full of corruption. So I just gave it away. I can see that corruption is inside of them all. They watch me from their empty sockets, but they still eat and eat. They're all so hungry that they eat my dreams. Every time I close my eyes, I can see their eyeless faces staring at me while I sleep. They're infected. They have to be. I have enough to kill them all. Their flesh isn't dirty. I can eat them. They can feed me. Something is in them. Something that is lacking in myself that they can provide. Nobody whispers in my ears. His thoughts and his words infiltrate my mind. I can see him through one eye, but not the other. I think he is changing me, but I cannot fight him. No one else can see him, and when I try to strike him, my fist falls through his body like a shadow. When I look in the reflection, I see nobody staring back at me. Nobody is a parasite, something deeper and darker than Adam's wrath. He followed my father, and he is attached to me. If I die, then he'll just spread to someone else here, but I can trap him. Even if I don't sleep anymore, nobody still rests, and while he sleeps is when I can plan, when I can act. Nobody needs them all alive. He doesn't realize I've been starving myself for days for a reason. If they die before me, then he will have a body that is too weak to escape, and he will die in this church. I know he will just be reborn as the shadow of the Violet Pharaoh, but I need to contain him. The others fear the silent screamers outside. They don't realize that nobody is far, far worse. As vile as Adam's wrath is, those parasites keep nobody contained. They will die in time, and I will face my judgment with my head held high. If there was a better way I could deal with this, I am sure that Hades will tell me. If I burn for this, then I will accept the flames with open arms. And I am sorry, Mercury, I cannot kill us. It's important that we starve together. We cannot let nobody escape. I will kill the youngest first, a knife through the rib cage, and when everyone's heart is stopped, a bullet through the skull to keep them from returning. Thank you, Newt, for letting me see truth. So, how's everyone doing after that story? Huh. Recorded that when it didn't need to be recorded. How's everyone doing after the end of that story? Cool. Glad everyone's doing okay. That is the important part. Don't do a story you think you're not ready for. Fall of New Fisher. Yeah, this is taking a minute, folks. It's okay. It's almost 45 minutes long, and it took us, wow, over an hour to record that. It's pretty quick. Good work, team. Couldn't do it without everyone's support. Keep thinking back to those old PBS messages from support from viewers like you. Thank you. So made me feel special as a kid, so I'll do it now. Because of support from viewers like you, I'm able to do stuff like this. So thank you. Thank you all. There's my daughter. There's a bunch of other pictures I have. Some of them I've used already. Some of them I'm still working on. Let's see if I remember which one of these it is. Let's try this one. But yeah, that eye on the door, that's this. Anyone recognize this? Anybody? Anybody at all? Well, it's called a wadjet or just the Eye of Horus. I'm glad that you're doing good, Kingen. Don't think I've got your pronouns, by the way, if you're comfortable sharing them. Yeah, I've got a few recordings here, but I do keep all my recordings on a separate hard drive, specifically to so that way I always have a copy. You hear too much about creators who create things and they lose it all, especially if YouTube decides to remove it. So yeah, even if YouTube decides to remove my stuff for whatever reason, I'll still have my stories. Awesome, she, her. But I'm so glad that the stories are helping you, and I'm glad you love Miss Sweetie. I love her too. She's definitely a favorite. And yes, the colors chosen on that palette was specifically to resemble the trans pride flag. You familiar with that flag? That is the wrong one. It's not the false familiar, it's the fall of New Fisher. This is why I keep all the names consistent. Well, these names are getting so complex, I might need to just start typing them in. But yeah, I do notice your comments. I don't always respond to them, Keegan, but I do appreciate them. But I can answer some any writing tips you want right now. Do you want a little fun one? Instead of trying to use ChatGPT, I recommend you try a writing prompt and then just take it from there. See what inspires you. You familiar with writing prompts? So writing prompts are basically little things that writers can make to help other writers. They're inspirations or the starts of stories to get people started. A fun one that I read earlier from Tumblr, of all places, essentially comes down to your parents wrote down Hades as your godparent as a joke. It became less of a joke when a three-headed puppy appeared on your doorstep. And now Hades and Persephone want to keep you safe from all of the Olympians' mischief. So now you got a good little start of a story there. You have Hades as a godfather, and he wants to keep you safe from the other Olympians. So, what kind of story would you write with that? What kind of story could you write with that? You let the idea inspire you, and you see what you can do. I do not like this update at all. Short answer about why I don't like it. It looks like it's making it harder for me to line everything up. Anything that takes my time is precious. Follow me, Fisher, and then the date. January 31st to February 7th, 2740 AUC. And I don't quite like the color of the border. What color do you think I should do, Keegan? Basically any color is available as long as I know what the hex code is. But here's some examples of colors that are available. What color do you think would work best here? See, these are some of the colors that I have available, but I can put in any color as long as I have the hex code. So no Vanta black, I'm afraid. Does anyone else in the chat have an idea what they want me to put as the color? Okay, I'll give you about another minute to respond. Okay, I'll pick a color then. Yeah, that works. Trust the process. And now we gotta add 20 seconds because YouTube needs those 20 seconds at the end to let people actually choose what they want. And again, the reason why I'm choosing it as like 44:54 and then 45:14 is because YouTube tends to add a second. So I need these. So I feel better when it actually, you know, is precisely like 44:14 or 45:15. So yeah, I will rather end it a second early to get that round number, or I guess not round number, but number that feels good. Gotta make sure the sound matches, it matches. Gotta make sure this fits. Yeah, this commissioned a long time ago for one of my characters, and I guess it's not my icon that represents me. Now we're gonna export that. And welcome back, Kingen. Let's see how long this will take to export. Ooh, looks like it's gonna be a few minutes. So yeah, I think that's about all I can really do tonight. It's gonna be well past midnight before I can upload all this stuff to YouTube, and it's probably gonna be even longer before I can do another video. But do we have any last minute questions before I let you go for the night? Anything at all? That's a joke. But yeah, I guess I'm gonna let this one go. I can't really record while this is exporting, it takes too much data, especially while I'm streaming. But thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you all have a good rest of your night. Bye. Let's stop this sharing and let's end this stream. Bye. Let's stop this sharing and let's end this stream.